Once again, we are back with the behind the scenes look at the Self-Employed Life podcast, where you get to have an experience with these wonderful guests way before everybody else. It'll be quite a while before this episode is broadcast as a podcast. So in the meantime, you're amongst the cool kids and you get to hear this earlier. So with that said, let's get to it. To be self-employed, we are visionaries. We need our visions to guide us and lead us to do big things. But it's also important to ground the visions in evidence-based action steps. Today, we're talking about, you could say, the science side of business, an evidence-based approach to achieving exceptional outcomes. Christina Curtis is the founder of Curtis Leadership Consulting, a thought leader on motivation and goal attainment. She regularly contributes to the Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and Psychology Today. As an accredited master coach with the International Coaching Federation, a designation held by only 1% of business coaches worldwide, I'm a little jealous. Christina's clients include Fortune 500 executives and leaders. She has a master's in organizational psychology from the University of London and a bachelor's degree from Queen's University. So you can see she's a bit of a slacker. But in her new book, Choosing Greatness, an evidence-based approach to achieving exceptional outcomes, Christina shares the science behind the choices we make that lead to greatness and success. Sounds perfect for us. Christina, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I am excited to have this conversation. Like a lot of us visionaries, I always say business is an art and a science. And many of us, most of us, I would say, are strong on the art side. We're creative content creators. We're visionaries. But in today's world, more than any other time, we also have to pay attention to the science of it, not just the science of algorithms, but the science of how our brains tick. And this is what you do so well.
Yeah.
One of the standout things you say in your book is that successful people, and you have spent so much time studying successful people, you say, understand the power of choice. The challenge is, love this, is that the brain is designed to conserve energy. What a thought. Never heard of this before. So how is the fact that the brain is designed to conserve energy, how does that make choosing, choices more challenging?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jeffrey. And it's something I've been observing for the past 20 years of executive coaching, where you have this thought, right? You're like, I want to take this on. I want to do this. I'm going to go after this thing. And whatever that thing may be is enticing to you. But then you don't do it. It doesn't come to fruition, or you try and then you fail. And why that is interesting from a neurological perspective is the brain is an organ that is economical in nature. So here's what I mean by that. If it's already decided what pattern of behavior it wants to execute, it's not going to choose a new one. If it's used to doing things a certain way, it's not going to say, gosh, let's invest the neurological calories to go create a whole new pattern and shift the way we do things and drive change. Instead, it just keeps doing what it's always done. And that leaves us operating on autopilot 42% of the day. 42% of the day, we are walking in, putting in the coordinates of where we've been rather than where we want to go. And what I've observed is when I look at the people who are truly exceptional in their field, or who have gone after really big goals and made it, is they can lean into that moment and elbow their way into that moment between an event and their reaction to it, and choose what will serve them, their patterns are doing. Wow. And that causes discomfort, Jeffrey. So you think, it's like, I like salt and vinegar chips. Okay. I love salt and vinegar chips. So every time I'm traveling and I pass a chip stand, I grab it. That's not because I'm dying for my brain isn't saying, Christina, it's really healthy to eat chips today. It's just a habit. Those are the habits that just drive me. And if I walk by the chips and don't buy it, I feel discomfort. The same happens every day. We have habitual patterns of how we engage with people and engage with problems. And if we don't start interrupting those patterns, we aren't going to get to where we want to go. That's where choice comes in.
Wow. All right. So it's interrupting the patterns. Is there ever an advantage? There's also a lot of emphasis on habits and patterns. So what's the line then between leaning into the strength of our patterns and habits and interrupting those patterns? Because I think that's a brilliant idea, but what's the balance between the two?
I know, and habits is a bit of a popular term right now. And
Right.
and here's what I would say from a brain perspective. Habits are really powerful in areas where there is little variation. How I brush my teeth, what I shop for at the grocery store, as long as they're good choices. My routine at the gym. Uh, where how I set up my time to respond to emails, if that's habitual every day. From a work perspective, it may be that. But be careful that habits aren't, I mean, the whole point of a habit is you set it and forget it. So then you've lost control.
Mhm. Yeah.
And the problems we're dealing with and the people that we work with every day, they don't stay static. They are constantly evolving. And I wish we could set a goal and then execute it in a vacuum where nothing changed, but that's just not reality. So you have to be able to ebb and flow every day and interrupt those patterns so they aren't running behind the scenes and hijacking our results without us even knowing it.
Brilliant. I've always been fascinated. That's why I find the science side of business and understanding what makes us tick. I find it fascinating because I think there's a lot of ways, particularly when you are striving for success. There seems to be a lot of ways that we need to rewire the inclination of the brain. Right? We are still. I don't know if maybe you have an opinion. I don't know if it'll ever change, but we as humans are still wired for survival. Right. So we
Hmm.
always see our threats. I just think the threats have changed. The threats are no longer lions and tigers and bears outside of our cave, but the
Yeah,
threats are, our self-esteem, the threats that we feel are comparison. Are we comparing ourselves to other people? And
completely.
right. And if you're not careful, so the threats have changed, but the fact of the matter is our brain's wiring to pay attention to those threats hasn't changed. And we need to
Yeah.
change that. Like one of the daily practices that I introduce to my students and coaching clients is what I call a what's going right journal. It's in my books, both of my books. Many
Mm.
people have used it, where it's different than a gratitude journal because I didn't find a gratitude journal rewired my brain, where I
Yeah,
felt a rewiring of my brain when I started journaling every day, what's going right. Because what we know is the more you focus on what's going right, the more you see what's going right. And I can actually,
completely.
right? And I can actually feel a rewiring because otherwise you just see, nine things could be going great, one thing could be going bad, and that's the only thing you see. So,
Completely.
yeah,
And we're not going to be able to change I mean, we have to leave evolution up to
that's
changing
going to be
the
a long
survival
process, right?
mechanisms.
Yeah,
But the
yeah.
more self-awareness we have on what's happening behind the scenes, the more we can choose how we want to engage with it versus just letting it run the show. And that is the most powerful thing. You talked about comparison. One of the greatest confidence killers is this need to compare ourselves to others, to look over a neighbor's fence and say, what are they doing? What title do they have? What car are they driving, et cetera? And that had a really interesting um, purpose when we were in a tribal existence. And those who had the most status got the most resources. And so there's this need to compare because you want to be constantly positioning yourselves and thinking, how do I get up? How do I get up the hierarchy? Well, now we have this global pool of billions of people that we can engage with. We don't have to be thinking about our smaller tribe, but it's why we feel more jealousy for someone in our network versus like Beyonce or Bill Gates. There's
Right.
no, I don't feel jealous of Beyonce. I think she's phenomenal,
No,
but bring
I'm
that win
jealous of
into my own
Jay-Z, but that's
tribe.
another thing.
Jay-Z,
Right.
that's a different
Exactly.
thing.
Yeah. So,
I
but
think that's
that's
an
a
interesting
great
one.
point. I mean, like I said, social media has really ignited that comparison. But let's also fit a lot of, and then I'm curious to see what your insights are on people that truly end up being successful. Is Do they use that comparison to
Mm,
their so-called advantage in that they're motivating? Because a lot of people, and at this point in my life, I don't see that as healthy. But I will
yeah,
admit that there were earlier points in my life, and I think a lot of people see that competition, that comparison,
yeah.
as fuel to motivate them. What did you find with the
Mm.
most successful people? Did they use that as a tool to get to where they are, or were they able to shut it off somehow?
Yeah, that's such a great question. First of all, you can't turn it off. We're
Mm,
hardwired, and so it keeps going, and that doesn't mean anything about you. I just always ground people on when self doubt shows up, whether it's through comparison or, gosh, is this dream too big for me? It's just a safety mechanism to identify there could be risk here. And that allows the brain to then analyze it in a more specific way and make sure that it's understanding the risk. It's not a fortune teller, it's not telling us to do it or not do it and what the outcome will be. But in terms of those who are super successful, the one thing I find is the way they engage with it isn't by making someone else better than them in any way. In fact, in my book, Kim Rivera, who is a chief legal officer at OneTrust, talks about how she allows any feelings like that to just move through her. And then she looks and says, how do I help this person? How do I engage? How do we collaborate? How do we move each other forward? And if there's something I'm envying, how do I isolate that to say, is that something I want to move towards? And that's where you can use it as a goal-directed motivator rather than a social comparison that makes you less than. That's a very important thing. As soon as you put yourself in a place where you feel at a lower status, you actually turn your prefrontal cortex off and move into self-protection. So you go from goal-directed behavior to self-protection. And that's not a great place from a neurological priming for goals.
Yeah, I think what you just said is such a great framework for understanding that. Is anytime you put yourself in a lower position, right, you're harming yourself. That's really well said. There's a quote in your book about goals that I'd like to read to you, and then get your insight on that. Goals need to harness and sustain their own motivational energy to overcome the daunting distance between here and there. And I'm thinking there is a neurological perspective on the here or there. So can you unpack that for us a bit?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we've gotten this goal setting thing wrong for some time now. And part of that is because if you think about a SMART goal, so it's specific, it's measurable, it's actionable, it's I'm not even going to remember all the elements of the acronym here. They're realistic, I think, and timely.
I think so. Timely, yep.
But we're emotional beings. We're emotional. We actually make decisions from a place in our subconscious and then rationalize it into action. So we have to remember emotions are what move us. They are what move us from sitting back on the couch watching Netflix to getting up at 5 a.m. to tackle some project early before the day begins. And so I find goals have to intrigue you and you have to be passionate about them. And they have to be embedded in your subconscious by making them very specific and clear and energizing. So I recommend people write goals 25 words or less. So that if I asked you, Jeffrey, what's the goal you're after? There's no thought required.
Yeah.
As soon as there's no thought required and it's immediate, it's actually driving decisions behind the scenes. And suddenly, it's like if I decided I was going to be 25% fitter this year, suddenly I'm going to see more stairs. Suddenly I'm going to be noticing people's running shoes. Suddenly I'm going to find myself talking about Orange Theory with someone over lunch when I never did last year. So it's priming you behind the scenes. And so it has to have that motivational, I want that. I want that. I'm going after that. And I even have mine up on my whiteboard in big font so that it's always there. But goals, yes, they have to have motivational pull between where you are now and where you want to go next.
Yeah, and to your point, keep them simple. I know in we do a whole workshop on goal setting from my own perspective. Just kind of in the trenches, what I've learned about goal settings. Like you, I've been deeply. I actually call it the goal paradox. Like it's a really goal setting is a really unusual thing for business owners because we have to set big goals. So we think to motivate ourselves, but yet how do we do that without setting ourselves up for disappointment? Because we don't, and the disappointment is what I see crush so many people. So I do an entire workshop on goal setting and perhaps you have some insight on this, but I try to limit, I say, first of all, you need to understand the difference between goals and projects. And a lot of what people think are goals are actually projects, that it really should come down to at maximum 3 goals a year.
Totally.
Like you can only handle remembering 3 goals. To your point, if you bring it down to 3 goals for the year, you're going to see opportunities to fulfill those goals that you can't if you've cluttered your brain thinking you have too many goals. And to separate them, these are projects to obtain those goals, but the goals are just 2 to 3 at most.
Yes, completely agree.
Awesome.
I'll take your course. I'm signing up.
Exactly. So I also really like this. And I tell you, this is something I have worked on for much of my adult life, which is using active language that's present based. Because I guess, I don't know if it's me or most of us were kind of wired with not present based language and not active based language. So explain what active language and present based means.
Yeah. If you speak with someone about something they want to take on, sometimes they'll say, someday I'm going to, or I'll try, or It's all in the future, which means you don't have to do anything about it today. And neurologically, that's like signaling, shelve it, put it on the
Yeah.
shelf. It's not in our periphery today. You're all good. And so you keep thinking about it, but it doesn't come, versus I am in the progress of, I am currently, I am doing, is very different than I will. And
Mhm.
so using active language when you're crafting those 25-word goals is very powerful in terms of signaling you're already in the process of doing it. And what they found from a research standpoint is if your brain believes it is already in the process of doing it, it's made headway towards the finish line and it's more motivated to keep on going. So there's a nice tailwind effect you get from that. The other thing I
Love that.
recommend people do is be really specific on weaving it into who you are as a person, making it part of your identity. And the reason I say that is they've had seen a positive return when people change language, for instance, from voting to saying, did you vote or are you a voter? If I am a voter, so I will tell you, if you say, hey, voters, come on out, I'm in. If you
Mm.
say, did you vote? No, why? So it's very interesting if you weave goals into your identity, uh, much stronger motivational force there as well. It's just
I
what you
love that.
do, it's who you are.
Yeah, I know. Something I consciously work on is remembering. I try to say I believe more than I think. If it's something I truly believe in,
Yeah.
right? There's a difference because I found at some point in my own path of leadership, when I started to feel the weight of being more responsible as a leader, I realized how often I said, "Well, I think," and I was like, "That's just too wishy-washy. That doesn't give anybody anything to lean on. Like,
Right.
just if you believe it, say you believe it." And welcome the challenge if somebody else believes something differently, but don't be wishy-washy about
Yeah.
it. So that's to me, that was an example of active language too, to just like own it and say, I believe
Completely.
this. Yeah. Um, so I have to say, I knew nothing about this CEO of DaVita, Javier Rodriguez. Um, Kind of
Hmm.
got a little bit of a crush on him in your book because what a
I
great
know.
leader he is. Oh my gosh, he has such a great leadership quality. And I loved his perspective on focus, which is something,
Yes.
as a creative thinker, I've argued all different points of focus because I don't like being told I can only focus on one thing. Um, but I
Yeah.
really, I like his perspective. The way you describe it, or the way he describes how he focuses externally with an eye toward value and impact, and internally by choosing the energy he brings to that thing. So can you explain?
Yes.
I think there's such an important duality there when it comes to focus, like how you behave externally and how you behave internally.
Yeah. Javier is one of the most impactful leaders I've ever met,
Wow.
full stop. And the way because he manages DaVita, which is a kidney care company, and they have 62,000 employees. And so he doesn't have the luxury of wasting time. Not that any of us do, but for him, it literally is tied back to saving lives. And what he does is he can sort through his day and say, where's the highest impact? He can sort through projects and say, where's the most important area of focus? He can sort through in meetings and say, circle this. What's this? Let's talk about that. And he's just got this eye for impact in high value activities that is quite profound and is able to cut through some of the noise and drive things forward quickly. Which in his case, again, saves lives. And the energy piece is really interesting because we don't think about how we manage our energy. I don't calendars to pause and check in on your energy, but energy is the most contagious uh, thing on the planet. In fact, you can track a leader's energy down to their results. There's really interesting research around a leader's energy that they bring and the mood they set in the office and the bottom line for the company. And as an entrepreneur, there is nothing more powerful in terms of you sharing your ideas and driving change in your companies than energy. And when you bring energy into an environment, it trickles out and helps people untangle problems. So if I came in here, Jeffrey, today and I was bummed out and low energy and I didn't say a word, if we sat together for 10 minutes in silence, my mood would transfer to you. That's how contagious it is.
Yeah.
Even I found this fascinating. There's something called the Framington study where they looked at a population over 20 years and kept doing surveys on mood, and they could actually track clusters of unhappy people and clusters of happy people. I mean, it spreads out to your communities
Wow.
really quickly. So his point is, even if you're having a bad day as a leader or as an entrepreneur, frankly, bring the energy that will serve you and your goals that day.
Yeah.
Choose it. And I felt really crummy yesterday. It's funny you're talking about this. I woke up, I had a bunch of valid reasons on why it should have been a mediocre day. And I thought of Javier and I said, no, I'm not going to, I'm choosing, I do not want to waste this day. I'm choosing to channel something else. And I went to the gym and I was fired up and I actually had an awesome day. But there were two days that day could have gone.
Yeah, I
And
100% agree with you. I think energy is so contagious that it doesn't have to be loud. And I think that's important for a
that's
lot of
right.
people to understand. Like, I think my energy on stage as a speaker is pretty powerful, and I've been told as such. But I'm not a speaker that comes charging out on stage because that's really not my personality. It's not my characteristic. So I agree with you. I mean, let's face it, some of the most contagious and powerful energy is often the quietest person in the room, right? It's the person
Yes.
that you feel their energy when they walk in the room. You feel their energy. Doesn't mean they have to say a lot or be loud, but it's whether you have owned the energy and like you said, chose the energy that you want to bring to that situation. I think it's such a great combination that Javier is presenting, right? This external focus on the things that bring the highest value and make the greatest impact, and taking ownership of kind of like the way I interpret it is sort of like choosing the energy that you want to put focus on.
That's
Right. Just
right.
kind of like take that energy and put it towards that thing, and everybody else will feel it as well. Interesting
Yeah.
perspective on focus.
Well, it ties back to body language as well. And I would hit on this because energy, we think of potentially our voice, but it actually manifests all different ways, including your nonverbal body language. So if you're leaning back in a meeting and reclining in your chair, you can project disinterest. And so that's the energy that will pass. If you're sitting banging on a table, which I'm sure none of your listeners are, that's the intensity and aggression that will pass. And so you do want to consciously think of, what energy am I trying to manifest around me? And am I projecting that? That's in all aspects of my being. Am I projecting that? That's very important.
Yeah. So similar to the energy, I think is I think a lot of us business owners deal with a lot of overwhelm, and you referred to cognitive overwhelm, right? Where you're cognitively just overwhelmed, not just your to-do list is
Yeah.
overwhelmed. And one of the ways to sift through that, similar to what Javier is doing, you talk about value over volume. Uh, and I think this is really important for those of us that are business owners, get really overwhelmed with the volume of things to do. And a way to be more productive. So help us understand, like, how can we cut through the overwhelm and actually look at the value over the volume?
Yeah. One of the best practices I've seen out there is pausing each week to reflect on the next 2 weeks coming up and actually doing what I call a calendar audit, in not with an eye towards how am I going to get from one place to the next, or am I prepared, but there's a whole other layer of, is this a high impact activity? Is this a high impact meeting? Is this something that I can delete or defer or delegate? Is this moving me forward? And if it's not, nothing personal, but it has to go. It's really, as an entrepreneur, your time has a direct correlation to your success, because you're waking up every day and creating something from nothing. And I strongly believe in the power of looking at your calendar for the next 2 weeks and saying, is this high value? Is this not? Can I delete and defer, delegate? And the other thing is not being afraid to say this isn't high value. And it's not always a no, but it may be a yes, and love to help. How else? Where else can we channel this question? Where else can we channel this activity? Do I need to be part of this today? Can I delegate it to my team member if I have one? But I'm strongly a proponent of making sure you're managing value rather than just taking on volume, because you drown in volume. Value is where you climb mountains and achieve.
Perfect. Well said. I actually loved what I was calling on my own, the 4 Ds, right? Which you offered. Like, I actually wrote it down. I posted a note: do, delegate, defer, or delete. Right. It's just
Yeah.
I think it's a great system to run through your brain when faced with the choices of what to do, what brings value, what's just volume. Like, do you need to do it? Can it be delegated? Can you defer it, or can you delete it? Right. I think it's a great practice just run through your mind. I also want to really commend you on something that's so, I think, near and dear to self-employed business owners is you insist that you, in your calendar audit or your calendar planning, that you merge home and work lives. That was so valuable to me because we live in a world, those of us that are self-employed know exactly what that looks like. But in the corporate world and the traditional world of business, we're told to separate those calendars, but you're actually telling people, no, the only way you're going to really manage this is if you merge your home and your work lives when it takes into consideration a calendar. I have to believe that comes from a real life perspective because, you got your own family life and a busy professional life as well.
Yeah. You're only one person, and so we can't think of it as two people out there in the world doing two different work streams. And I would add on that, it's okay to recognize when you are feeling overwhelmed that you may be saying yes because of some belief that you have. So maybe you believe that you need to be doing everything in order to be of value. Maybe you believe you need to be doing everything to be loved by the people in your life. Maybe you believe you need to do everything to be successful. And I will tell you, the people who I've seen rise to the very top from a fulfillment, happiness perspective and a success perspective are not saying yes to everything. And they're not making saying no mean that there's something wrong with them and they can't handle it. Because that's what happens, right? If I say no, then I'm weak. Then I'm not good enough. And I'm challenging you that it's okay to say, that's not aligned with where I'm headed, and maybe I can help you at a later time. We have to be careful. What we do becomes a metric for success in some ways, and we attach it to our worth. And those two are not correlated. I don't know where they got collapsed in time, but we need to separate them back out.
Love that. I said, it's just so important, I think, for because we do, like you said, we're one person, we live holistic lives, and those of us as self-employed see that crossover more than most. And it's not just that, you're in the middle of your workday, you have to pick up a sick kid from school, although that is a reality. It's also, I look at it also as a performance, when you are your business. What's going on in the various channels of your life are going to affect your performance. So it's just acknowledging that and knowing that it's just impossible to keep those things fully separate. You talk about, and I'd love more insight on this, cognitive booby traps. So it's a great term. So what are they and what should we be looking for?
Yeah, well, cognitive booby traps are the fact that we are hardwired with cognitive biases. We just are. So if you've got like I talked about before, the brain is not going to create new beliefs unless it has to. I mean, it's expenditure of mental calories. So when I find there's resistance in my life, when I find I'm hesitant to take something on, or someone shares an opinion and I want to shut it down, or someone says, you should try this. And I'm like, yeah, but I've already tried it. Yeah, but it's a really good trigger that you've hit a cognitive booby trap. Essentially, our best thinking gets ensnarled by our past patterns and says, nah, that's not going to work because there's risk, because it's new, because it's different. And we put our bias on it before we've even. And so the people who I see rise to the top come from a very objective place and say, let me look at that and then choose to take it on or not. They don't just move and say no. They don't just move and say that's not the right idea. That knee-jerk reaction is driven by past decision-making and behavior, which got me to where I am now. But again, it's not going to get me where I want to go. So I want to pause. I want to look at that belief and say, is that accurate for where we're headed? Yes or no? Yeah. Otherwise, we keep repeating previous mistakes, get same feedback. I mean, many of us get the same feedback year after year. And we're not pausing long enough to say, let me actually hear that, listen to the impact, and choose something else.
Yeah, you actually offer 3 questions, which I think a great exercise in which we can ask ourselves when we are innovating, or whether we're faced with a problem, when we're faced with a choice, what do I do here? The 3 questions you offer in the book are, what am I missing? What else could be true? I love that one. And what other possibilities are available? I do ask when I'm in a choice decision, when I can sense bias entering itself. I think the question, what else could be true? I love that question. It's very creative inducing, I think, to think of other creative solutions or creative ideas to move your business forward. I love that.
Yeah, and intelligence is not an immunity against bias, meaning no matter how smart someone is, biases are hardwired. They are just helping us analyze information quickly and putting it into compartments that we already have in place. And so, uh, pausing is the most powerful thing you can do as an entrepreneur to make sure you're making well-informed decisions and say, if I can see uh, space A to space B, I wonder what B to Z is, and why don't I let my curiosity off the leash and go and figure that out before I make this call?
Yeah, I tell you, another podcast guest from years ago, Julie Continu, she wrote a book called Twist. Has always been one of my favorite resources, or memory of having my conversation with her has helped me through a lot of innovative. It's called Twist because the story set that she sets it up with is great. She was apparently at an airport at the gate, looking out the window at the tarmac, and the plane on the tarmac had a McDonald's logo on it. And she thought to herself, when did McDonald's get into the airline industry? And she realized it was actually the McDonald's inside the gate behind her, was just the logo was perfectly reflecting through the window on the
Wow.
plane. But it got her thinking about that type of innovation. Like, what else could be true? Like, what if it was true that McDonald's had an airline? What could that look like? And how can,
Yeah.
and it's been, it's stuck with me for so many years as a tool to imagine what else could be true. I mean, it seems far-fetched,
Yeah.
but what if it was true? What can we learn from it? What would that look like? I mean, Virgin Airlines was a great example of that. I mean, who would have thought what was originally a rock music label would, become an airline, and yet the experience was actually very similar of the airline.
Right.
So, really interesting kind of brand blend there. You've spoken a few times, which is so valuable, and it really stood out to me, the idea of burning unnecessary mental calories. I love calling them calories, by the way. I think that's a great way of looking at it. What stood out to me also is the idea of a negative mindset.
Yeah.
To me, your idea that a negative emotion burns unnecessary mental calories, if you're looking to achieve big things, I can't find a better justification for not letting yourself have that negative thought. It's a great way to
Yeah.
put it, as far as it actually burning unnecessary mental calories. Great way of putting it.
Yeah. My father-in-law says worry is a wasted emotion, which I love, but because it doesn't solve it, right? It's exploring something and analyzing something can be fruitful, but just worrying, and that's what happens to us, Jeffrey. We go to bed at night, or we wake up in the morning with this low buzz grade worry, anxiety. Many of us, or you wake up in the middle of the night disrupted by it. And particularly now that we have all these devices around us and are getting pinged from every side, I find our baseline stress is more like an 8 or 9 out of 10, which leaves us very little wiggle room to deal with setbacks in the day, because it pushes us right over into overwhelm, to your point earlier. And as soon as you go into overwhelm, your prefrontal cortex, your thinking power turns off. You've gone from healthy stress to strain, and you're no longer productive and effective. And I feel we tend to treat ourselves poorly and treat other people. We're more reactive. And so I think it's really important for us all to just slow down at some point during the day, take micro breaks to allow ourselves to recharge. Even if it's 3 minutes, it can have a really big impact neurologically for focus. And then choose how you want to engage, constantly bringing down that baseline stress from an 8 or a 9 out of 10 to more like a 6 or a 7, so you can handle some spikes. To me, that's really valuable. And then you can say, where do I want to invest my calories? Because you only have about 240 minutes of high octane thinking every day available to you. Roughly right, 240 minutes where your brain is zinging and humming. And I'm sure you know when it happens to you, that moment of clarity where you're just in flow. You're just thinking, I don't want to stop doing this because it's all coming to me. And then you have times of the day where you're staring at the same thing and you're like, and nothing is coming. And so it's really important to choose those mental calories and invest them on things like high octane thinking, rather than worry and self-doubt and negative thinking, which just depletes all that really juicy, important fuel that you need to advance your business.
Yeah, I love the idea of a kind of a low grade buzz of worry or overwhelm or fear. Because the low grade buzz, I think, could be applied to a lot of things, and it's just like there. I think that's it's like you get up from bed and maybe if you use a white noise machine, you shut that off, but now the white noise is inside of you. It's like this low grade buzz of worry
Yeah.
that's like white noise inside of you. I love that. So with that in mind, neurologically speaking, what is the healthiest way to shift a negative emotion? Is there, neurologically speaking, is there a fine line between like sweeping it under the carpet or
Yeah.
actually shifting it?
Yeah. It's a very important question. And I think athletes deal with this often because they're constantly out there playing a game and then have setbacks that are very tangible versus our setbacks, which sometimes are more emotional
Mhm.
rather than tangible. So I'll use sports as an analogy. And Daniel Nestor is a wonderful role model for this. He's won 8 Grand Slams and an Olympic gold medal and has won more doubles tennis games than anyone in the world and anyone in
Wow.
history, which is pretty cool, with different partners, might I add. Uh, he's exceptional. And he attributes a lot of it to his ability to manage some of those negative thoughts that happen on center court at Wimbledon, let's say, where he hits the ball and it goes into the net. And instead of focusing on what didn't work, instead of focusing on the negative energy around that, he'll shift back and say, what do I need to analyze? And he literally uses anchor statements: swing all the way through the ball, hit to the power side of the court. I'm going to mess those up because I'm not a tennis player, but
Yeah.
he has very specific anchor words that he uses to interrupt that negative self beating himself up and say, almost robotically, what do I need to adjust? Go back into action. What do I need to adjust? Go back to in action. And the way I think about it, when let's say I'm in a board meeting and I say something I didn't like, or I didn't land a client engagement that I was so excited about. Let's just say those are setbacks that we can all relate to. Instead of focusing on the negative, I'll say, great, let's focus on not perfection, where any deviation is failure, but excellence. What did I learn and how do I grow? What do I learn and how did I grow? That's it. And then you can keep going and get back in action rapidly. So it's really reframing it and moving rather than ruminating again at night or in the morning. Get back out there and try what you've just learned
Yeah.
and put it in play.
Well, moving versus ruminating, that's a big one. But I also love the idea of interrupting versus sweeping. I had set up the question by,
Mm-hmm.
sweeping it under the carpet, which I can't imagine neurologically is healthy, but interrupting it, right? That feels like a healthy way to deal with, because of all the human inclination, the brain inclination, the neurological information is fed into the brain. Interrupting it just sounds like exactly what we need to do to reframe that negative emotion. Like, don't sweep it away, don't pretend,
Right.
but to interrupt it because it's likely to be a neurological response as to why you're heading that direction. Just interrupt where you're going, go someplace else. Move instead of ruminate. I love that. Oh my gosh, this is such valuable stuff, Christina, because I said we have to work with, I think that it's important to work with humanity. And somebody that's always stood out to me is the Dalai
Mm.
Lama, right? Dalai Lama, considered one of the greatest spiritual leaders on the planet. And yet, and been fortunate to interact with him a couple times. He loves science. Like, he's a
Yeah.
complete science geek. And if anybody can merge the ethereal with the
Mm-hmm.
groundedness of science, like the Dalai Lama, like, then there's something to that. So I love this conversation about the neurological and science side of choosing greatness. Choosing
Yeah.
to raise to our uh, highest achievements, as you say. I love that. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing.
Good.
But before I let you go, what's one thing about you that says everything about you?
Such a big question, Jeffrey. It was interesting. I was given this ring, which some of your viewers will see, but it has 3 bands around it from my husband because we have almost lost our son on multiple occasions due to some previous medical issues that luckily, thank goodness, he has now overcome.
Wow.
But the 3 rings remind me every day of the power of what I'm trying to achieve in this lifetime. And the first ring is about grounded. I just want to be grounded. I want to show up as me. I don't want to try to be somebody else. I don't want to be anxious in meetings and project somebody I'm not. I want to be grounded and really centered. The second one is around growth. I want to constantly be growing. Every day, I want to think through, how do I be a better parent, a better partner, a better business owner, a better leader for female leaders out there. I'm very focused on growth and iteratively moving myself forward from a skills and mindset perspective. And then the third one is grateful. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to be on this show. I mean, it just brings emotion for me. I'm grateful that I have a family that I can turn to that's still with me. And I'm just beyond grateful for the health that we have right now. But gratitude drives me. And I don't want to lose sight of that. Otherwise, we're achieving and not really recognizing the benefits of that achievement. So grounded, growth, and grateful. And thankfully, my husband got me a ring, so I remember that every day.
Wow. That's fantastic. Very cool. So Christina, tell us how we can find out more about the book and your work and all that you're up to.
Sure. Choosing Greatness is now available for pre-order, Barnes & Noble or Amazon or Tattered Cover, wherever you like to shop. So I'd love for you to pick up the book and learn more about some of the work that I've been doing over the past 3 years around the research of choosing greatness. And I'm available on Instagram and of course LinkedIn and on my website. But Christina Curtis is my Instagram handle, and my website is curtisleadership.com. curtisleadership.com. Come check me out.
Great. Well, of course, we'll make sure all those links are available in our show notes at jeffreyshaw.com/podcast. And I also want to just mention, as a fellow author, that, when a book is available for pre-order, go pre-order it, right? Because the whole advantage is, hey, you're laying out a few bucks. It's no big deal, but pre-order it because it's going to just, you've heard something that you want more of. Don't talk about neurologically speaking. You're not going to remember to order it when the book comes out. Right? Neurologically speaking, you're asking too much of your brain. So if you like what you've heard, just go spend the few bucks, pre-order the book, and you know what? It means a lot to the authors because the day of release, all those pre-orders are counted the day of release. So it really gives a big launching pad to the author. So there's my little spiel on behalf of all authors. Don't just put off buying a book because it's on pre-order. Get it now. You won't have to think about it later. But Christina, thank you so much for being here. It's really been a pleasure.
Oh, it was great. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Awesome. And remember, you might be in business for yourself, but you are not in business by yourself. Be your best self, be proud, and keep changing the world.